Hey guys, Rebecca here. I know a lot of you guys went through the what if analysis approach last night in the beta environment or the UAT environment. And what I want to do today is talk about how we can approach what if analysis until that feature becomes live and in production. We don't have a timeline of when we can expect that. So, what we need to do is set our customers up for success when it does come out. And this is one of the conversations that came up in our last one, or lunch and learn. We were talking about, should we go with the timeline approach or break out the scenarios so they're separate? So you have your baseline, your current state, and then you would break out any of those future states or what if analyses. And I'm going to walk you guys through the benefits of each, the negatives of each, and then what we actually decided as a management team that we should all use as a team going forward, and we should advise our customers as well. So if we get into the first slide, we have the two comparisons of these, and we have the scenario timeline, and you guys know what that is. You create your scenario, you set it as current, and then you can create copies from there. And what some of us have been doing is creating that baseline and then creating copies to represent our what if scenarios. And within each of those copies, creating that's where you update the workshop questions and you can see the changes along the timeline. But the real benefit there is you can quickly copy it over and find your results really quick. And then there's another approach that some of us have been using where we break out the scenarios, just like what I talked about. You have your baseline, but then you create a separate scenario, totally scope it out and populate the data yourself. So we're going to go through these two. For the scenario timeline, so the good, it's easy to copy. You can quickly compare. You can toggle between both of those views and compare that ALE or the per event impact that we want to focus on, or the frequency. And also it's a clean scenario library. So everything is in one scenario, one line item. You don't have to worry about a million what ifs clustering up your library. So the bad, you cannot delete along your timeline. So if you create a mistake or you just don't want to do that what if anymore, you cannot delete it. So there's some struggles there. And then as well as the naming convention, if we think about that timeline view, it's only allowing us to name, or it automatically names it based off of the date of which we created the analysis. And a lot of us, especially with pilots or even engagements where we're doing PS projects, you have your baseline scenario, you finalize it, and then you probably go right into your future states. And it can all be within the same day. It can get very confusing to tell which is which. And there's some workarounds, adding in details in the summary, but not ideal. And then the ugly, you cannot select past scenarios in your risk assessment. So what that means is when you're in the risk assessment, you cannot go into a scenario and choose along your timeline which version you want to bring in. So it's less than ideal, especially if you want to rely on that current state for the reporting that you're doing. The what if is just there to help with the comparison. It's not really that baseline that maybe sometimes we want to pull into a risk assessment. And then data helpers. This is a really big one that we see as a struggle and as an issue. It wasn't initially brought up, but what that means is when you go to the reason we have the timeline is that you can change data helpers and data libraries to reflect future versions. So if maybe you want to change your primary response cost and it will increase year to year, you can change your data helper and then it will update all of your scenarios along the timeline. And right now, if you have like 5 what if scenarios, it's going to update only that last run version. So it's not a true reflection of that baseline that we would expect. And then for the breakout, we have the good. So risk assessment reporting, there's the top risk reporting, there's the areas where we can kind of mock up a comparison. And then the data helpers can be used when you break it out. What that's doing is keeping your current state or your baseline, the integrity of it intact. You're not worrying about it getting lost in that timeline view, and it keeps the original intact. The bad, So you have to re-enter data. You have to create a new scenario. You have to copy and paste all of the rationale, the data, confirm that your confidence and skew curves set correctly. So there's a lot of things, manual labor that goes into it, and issues with fat fingering and just not correctly moving things over. And it takes longer to see the results. You can't sit in front of the customer and just hit the copy button and update. You probably want to encourage taking a break, building out the scenario on your own, copying it over, and then showing them how that can be done. And then the ugly, messy scenario library. Nobody likes messiness. And it's still no nice comparison reporting. So it still doesn't get us to that ultimate goal. And it's just not going to be possible. So that's a workaround regardless. So, of those two, drum roll, what did we decide on? So the winner is the scenario breakout. And the main driver here is the data helpers working and keeping the original intact. Long term, we want customers to be using the timeline for the for the reason it was built, right? It was built to capture how your risk will change year to year, or quarter to quarter, however often you're seeing updates and changes based off of those data helpers and various libraries that we can change. And it's really meant to capture how that current state changes, not based off of the what if. So it's creating confusion. If you can't delete those what ifs out, you're never going to get back to that current state without a lot of workarounds. So it's just less than ideal. Here's an example of what that looks like. You have your baseline. Scenario 2 and 3 should be your what ifs, and those should be separate scenarios, their own independent line items to represent that what if. We should use some sort of naming convention to really tie it back to that original. And you can decide on that with the customer and what their naming convention preference is. That's what I would recommend. But ultimately, for now, until we have that what if approach in the platform and it's fully functioning, we should be breaking out scenarios and encouraging customers to break them out as well. This will really just set them up for long-term success, and everyone will win. So more workaround, a little more manual, but in the long run, it's the great option. So break out your scenarios and life will be good. Thanks for the 5 Minute Friday. Bye, guys.